Welcome to POCubed's rundown of the first 25 games from our chronological journey through the Game Boy's entire library. This collection encompasses everything released in 1989. If you like the video, please do consider subscribing to the channel. We have a new game review every day from Monday to Friday. Also, if you visit the Linktree page, you can subscribe to the mailing list, which will give you all the latest updates on the progress of the book itself. At the very least, please click the thumbs up button or leave a comment. What's your favourite game from 1989? What are you most looking forward to in 1990? Next week, we're starting the 90s in earnest, but for now, settle in for this bumper edition of the Portable Power Podcast. You could be forgiven for thinking that for any new system, the chosen launch titles should be solid, tested to a fault, showcasing what the new technology is all about. They can be primitive and simple, as long as they're fun, and yet we have baseball. This was a launch title in all regions. Now, in North America and Japan, this makes sense, but as a European, I'm not sure why they even bothered releasing this game at all over here. Rounders is a game that kids play in school, and it wasn't until 1990 that we got a soccer game. Leaving all that aside, this game is not the best way to experience the sport for the first time, or at all. Starting the single player game gives you a grand total of 2 options, USA mode or Japan mode, the only difference being the generic names given to your players. USA mode allows you to choose a team led by Mario or Luigi, despite the fact that they're Italian characters designed by Japanese game developers. The sprites don't even look like those guys, even though it's clearly Mario pitching on the cover art. The close-up sprites we get are alright, although it would be nice to see the game from the pitcher's perspective when you're not batting. You can alter your throws with curve, but I don't think it makes a difference. Laziness is all over this one. When you're taken to the overhead field view, it looks like something from the Atari 2600. I know the Game Boy was low res, but it was capable of a lot more than this. The AI here will destroy you, fielding and batting. I don't think it's possible to beat this game. At least, I don't want to try. Your fielders move like they're playing on the moon. The slowdown is ridiculous, but this doesn't help you catch the ball at all. You just get longer to watch your fielders get nowhere near it. Also, you can't always automatically move the closest player, but some off-screen character that you need to guess the location of. Or even sometimes 2 or 3 players. Or none. Occasionally they'll just get stuck on the boundary for some reason. This game is an absolute mess, which brings me back to my initial point. Was this game tested at all? I find it hard to comprehend why Nintendo would choose to kick off their handheld with this. The best thing about baseball is the animation you get when you get trounced, which you will. Your assorted failures line up apologetically for their fans, who proceed to lob their garbage, hitting the guy at the end with more accuracy than your fielders can manage. We can only hope that they were throwing copies of this cartridge. One of the most imitated styles of video game of the time was the bat and ball break-em-ups popularised by titles such as Breakout and Arkanoid, so it was inevitable there'd be one on the Game Boy. And it's a format that certainly works on the little handheld. Alleyway gives you 24 stages, which is alright in itself. However, they repeat themselves in 8 groups of 3. The first one in a trio is a standard block-breaking level, but this is always followed by a side-scrolling variant of the same board. The third is the same again, but this time the level descends towards you. In a game where there's not a great deal going on to begin with, This repetitiveness will probably bore you to tears before you can get through all 8 layouts. If you manage to get through all of them, you can loop the game, although there's really no reason to. Plus, there's no music in the game, except for the bonus levels, so it doesn't even have that to stimulate you. The sounds you get change depending on which colour block the ball hits, but they're still forgettable. You have a reasonable amount of control over your paddle, being able to move faster or slower than normal by pressing A or B. The ball only moves in 15, 30 or 45 degree angles though. There is some speed up when you hit the darker blocks, but it never gets crazy enough. Later on, if you hit the top of the board, your paddle shrinks, but even so, the game is not much of a challenge. Your main obstacle will be holding your concentration for long enough. I don't see how this game brings anything new to the table. There are no power-ups like multi-balls or through-balls to be had, something that even its predecessors featured. Alleyway is one of those games, really. What's there is pretty good, it's just that there's not enough there. Now this is more like it. The launch title that is perhaps most fondly remembered is the indomitable little plumber's first outing on the Game Boy. Super Mario Land is such a mainstay of video game history, and deservedly so. Mario was already firmly established in the original Super Mario Bros. Games on the NES, and was always going to be the flag bearer for a new Nintendo console. Super Mario Land sold more than 18 million copies, more than Mario 3 on the NES, and played a huge part in the early success of the system. However, the graphics are more akin to the first Super Mario Bros. Game than number 3. It can't be ignored that the look of this game is incredibly Spartan. Perhaps this was Nintendo playing it safe at such an early age. Mario is only 12 pixels high, and several enemies are equally lacking in detail. This was a strange decision, especially considering that there's not a whole lot going on in the backgrounds either. In the realm of strange decisions, this game went against the Mario canon sometimes. Mario's father and creator, Shigeru Miyamoto, took a somewhat hands-off approach to Mario's first portable adventure, leaving many creative decisions to the unadulterated genius of Game Boy inventor Gunpei Yokoi. This game isn't set in the Mushroom Kingdom, but some alternate universe called Sarasa Land, an odd place where fireballs fly diagonally, Koopas explode, and one-up mushrooms are replaced by hearts. It's not Princess Peach you're saving. Here, the hapless, distressed damsel is one Princess Daisy. Yes, it's that Mario game. Ultimately, though, this is the same game you've played before. The storyline is not the thing to focus on, rather, what this game achieved. The controls are tight and responsive, if a little slippery at times, and it may seem that the controls are nothing to remark on, but they set a certain benchmark for future platformers on the Game Boy. The perfect A to jump, B to fire setup in the 2-button format cannot be improved upon, despite the efforts of some development companies insisting it should be the other way around. This is how you program platformers. It's instinctive and so ingrained in players' reflexes that any other combination just doesn't work. Sorry, Ocean and LJN, but you're not winning that argument. Aside from the traditional levels, there are a pair of side-scrolling shooter stages which actually play really well, with some particularly excellent music adding to the more frenetic pace. The entire soundtrack really is a masterpiece. It's not a long game, but the compositions that accompany it are delightful, burrowing into your subconscious for hours after turning the game off. And that ending theme, oh wow. Sadly, Super Mario Land can't be awarded a perfect score. The graphics let it down too much. It's understandable why these design choices were made. Yokoi and his team were working with a brand new medium, and it would have been all too possible to overwhelm the prospective audience with too many visuals. Even so, it's just too sparse, which, when coupled with the dot matrix blur, could have put players off. The gameplay, while excellent in so many ways, doesn't get a 10 out of 10 either because the game's just too short and too easy. The same justifications could potentially apply to this too, and there is a hard mode unlocked if you fancy looping the game. Despite these minor shortcomings, it has to be remembered and acknowledged that this was one of the first games on the Game Boy. Its importance cannot be understated. So many games followed this formula and many fell short. There were a few, however, a blessed few, that took what Super Mario Land started, ran with it, and made wonderful things happen. These will be visited later on. For now, put this book down and play this game. You owe it to yourself because, despite its occasional ugliness, it's unfeignedly quite beautiful. The only launch title not to be released outside of Japan, Yakuman is the name of a particularly powerful group of hands in Japanese mahjong, analogous to something like a royal flush in poker might be. In fact, mahjong is perhaps closer to the card game Rummy, whereby you need to rely on a combination of skill, strategy, and luck to assemble the best possible hand. There are 144 tiles split into 3 sets, 3 groups of 36 suits, dots, bamboo, and number characters, 2 groups of honours, 16 wind titles that say north, south, west, and east, and 12 dragons, and 8 bonus tiles of flowers and seasons. I'm not going to attempt to ham-fistedly explain the rules of mahjong, as it's not straightforward by any means, and is best learned by playing the game with people who already know it. Essentially, you're trying to make the best hand of 13 tiles, plus the bonus one that's dealt to all players at the start, out of tiles that you pick up one by one, discarding ones you don't want. You can go for 3 or more tile straights, 3 or 4 of the same tile, and so on. You can have some pairs in your hand, but there are limits. You're allowed either 1 pair or 7. That's it. If you can make all 14 tiles into pairs, that's fine, and you can have 1 or 0 pairs amongst your hand, but no higher than that. There are other intricacies like that you're going to have to find for yourself, as my knowledge isn't the best. I mentioned the special hands before. These are special hands that are a double-edged sword because, while extremely powerful and virtually guarantee you'll win the round, are very tricky to get before an opponent has a hand they can declare as tenpai, or ready, i.e. they've won by reaching certain conditions in their hand. You may have seen these tile sets if you ever played a version of Mahjong Solitaire, which uses the same collection of stones. Essentially, these serve the same purpose as a deck of cards do, whereby the same cards can be used to play many different games, both solo and multiplayer. In fact, you'll see the same tiles in just a couple of games' time in Shanghai. Sometimes you can get around the barrier of Japanese language games, but this is one to get a fan translation of if you're able to, as it's not super intuitive otherwise. Well, perhaps if you can learn the basic tile numbering you might be able to get around it, but the finer points of the game, such as Dora and Richi, will probably be lost on you. Even then, there's no tutorial in Yakuman as to what the rule set is, so you'll have to Google that as well. The score I've given is based on my own experience playing Mahjong when I've been lucky enough to be invited to traditional Chinese New Year celebrations. I struggled then, and I struggle now, but from what I can understand, this is a pretty good rendition of Japanese rules Mahjong. As early titles go, tennis is a good choice. Pong showed us that tennis is a sport that translates well to even the most rudimentary video game systems. This game, like its NES counterpart, is simple fare that concentrates on being tennis. There's not much here though. No career mode, tournaments, doubles match, not even a name entry screen. Tennis looks nice, nothing is cramped, and the sense of perspective on the court works well. It's not difficult to discern where the ball's heading. Mario's umpire calls and head movements are nice touches. The music gets old pretty quickly, although you can turn it off, the problem therein being left with a rather sparse collection of sound effects from a Space Invaders reject list. They do the job, but I certainly wouldn't bother with headphones with this one. The physics lend themselves well to an enjoyable experience. I occasionally find myself disagreeing with the hit detection, but once you learn what you can get away with, it's no big deal. There are a range of shots at your disposal. You can aim long or short, left or right quite nicely, and it's pretty responsive. The AI is surprisingly good with a range of difficulties. It's a satisfying enough game, focusing on one aspect and doing it well. More thorough game testing would have been beneficial, however. There's a strange service glitch whereby you throw the ball, swing underneath it rather than hit it, and then sidestep, letting the ball hit you on the head. You'll win the point automatically, every time. Now, I must admit to not knowing a great deal about the sport, but I don't think that's a rule. If there's anything that defines the word quintessential, it's Tetris for the Game Boy. I wouldn't for a second recommend that people only play one Game Boy title, but if for some bizarre reason you were only able to get hold of one, then make it this one. In the same way that North Americans in the mid to late 80s referred to playing video games as playing Nintendo, the Game Boy was often dubbed the Tetris machine, and not without reason. Tetris was not originally designed for Game Boy, of course. There's a very interesting and controversial history behind this game's journey to the West, with licensing issues featuring Atari and Nintendo, as well as two separate developers creating NES ports. All of this happened before 1989. By the time the Game Boy was ready to hit the shelves in North America, Tetris was firmly under the stewardship of Hank Rogers' Bulletproof Software and Nintendo, and was the perfect title, by intuition or fluke, who cares, to pack in with the system. It cannot be understated how important this game was to the success of the Game Boy, and still is to its undying legacy. This is the definitive version of one of the most well-designed, addictive, enduring, hell, one of the best video games of all time. No less than creator Alexei Pajitnov has stated that it's by far his favourite version, as it most closely captured the essence of his original design. It's true that any other iteration, past or present, is inevitably compared to this one, and they all fall short, bar none. For those of you reading a book about the Game Boy who don't know what Tetris is, it's the essence of simplicity. It's the original falling block puzzle game, often imitated, never improved upon. Puzzle pieces, or tetrominos, arranged in 7 configurations of 4 blocks, hence tetra, fall from the top of the screen down onto a board 10 spaces wide by 20 high. The aim is to align horizontal rows of 10 blocks, which will then clear away, dropping the rest down. If any part of the construction reaches the top, it's game over. Up to 4 rows can be removed at any one time, garnering much bigger points. After a certain amount have been cleared, the level and speed of descent increases. There's also a Mode B game, which, rather than having an empty grid, features a random assortment of blocks that you need to clear out, following the same rules. Tetris isn't strictly a puzzle game, as there are no set patterns to winning, nor is anything predetermined. No, it's arguably the most elegant and pure example of a strategy game, whereby the balance between risk and reward holds the key to the most massive scores. You need to calculate how high you can build those towers, saving that single solitary column for the blessed straight piece, while weighing up the chance that you might not get it at all. The frantic speed of the higher levels means good hand-eye coordination is a powerful weapon, as one slight wrong move and catastrophe can quickly befall you. The game really excels too with the link cable, one of the few legitimate reasons to use it in my opinion. By clearing lines, you force more blocks to drop onto your opponent's screen, making for an incredibly frantic duel. You control either Mario or Luigi, because who else, right? And can play multiple round competitions. The music is super catchy, with a choice of Russian-style folk and classical. The sound effects are simple and well made. Visually, you can't ask for more. What originally was famous for being a colour game was transposed so well to a monochrome that the game wasn't hindered in the slightest. The simplest of fixes to a problem that would plague many titles that came after it. The game sold 35 million copies, which is astronomical to say the least. 4 times the amount sold for the NES. Indeed, from 1989 until the release of Wii Sports in 2006, Tetris was topped only by Super Mario Bros. For the NES in terms of the highest-selling single console title of all time. This is an outrageous statistic for a monochrome game on a handheld that was decidedly primitive, even next to other handhelds of the time. Similar to how Wii Sports opened up video games to people who ordinarily didn't care, Tetris was embraced by all demographics, from old people to commuting bankers. This didn't suffer from the stigma of video game, it was just a game, a challenging alternative to the daily crossword. An even more pleasing statistic for Game Boy fans is that until the PS2 came along, the Game Boy was the highest selling console, not just handheld, but any video game system, of all time. More than the NES, Super NES, Mega Drive, PlayStation, you name it. It's no stretch at all to say that Tetris was a huge factor in this success, possibly the biggest. It quickly became the defining game for the system, and never lost that accolade. What a perfect fit. At the start of this book, as we are right now, I can't definitively state this, but I'd wager there's no game more of a soulmate to the Game Boy. I'd absolutely love to see it if such a thing exists, but I don't think it possibly can. Following the Japan-only launch title release of the traditional rules Mahjong game Yakuman, we have a version of Mahjong Solitaire. Shanghai is much more accessible to non-Japanese speakers, however, and did see a North American release. The game uses the standard Mahjong tile set, but rather than playing against an opponent here, the tiles are stacked in a predetermined pattern. Matching pairs of tiles can then be removed, provided that at least one vertical side can be touched, and the tile is not underneath another, with the aim to remove all pairs of tiles. Accompanying the small selection of frankly cliched Chinese music, we have some pretty bland graphics. The Mahjong tiles are clear enough, so no problem there. You can change the nice looking traditional designs for a letter-based one if you want. If you clear the board, you get a picture of a dragon blinking at you, and that's it. I'm not sure what I was expecting exactly, but it's a little underwhelming. The title screen has a lady with the sharpest nose, frowning and blinking at some water lilies for some reason. There's only one tile layout, which is a shame. It doesn't encourage you to play for more than one round. But hey, if you want to play Mahjong Solitaire, this'll do. For what HAL accomplished later on the Game Boy, we can forgive them this one. "1981 saw the birth of Thinking Rabbit's crown jewel, Sokoban, a puzzle game in which the player pushes but never pulls crates around a labyrinthine warehouse onto predetermined tiles for some reason. Despite this concept having its heyday long before the Game Boy's release, the little system was perfect for such puzzlers, and so we have a legitimate descendant, Boxxle. The reason given this time is that some sweaty, grinning proponent of inefficient manual labour needs to perform this assumedly low-paid makework to buy a present for his true love. A pallet truck would have been easier, but there'd not be much of a game. Anyway, whatever the tacked-on story might be, what we have here is a rather addictive and frankly pure evil brain ache of a game. This game feels a little like a frame of snooker, carefully planning out which box to move without blocking others in order to clear the whole lot. Trial and error doesn't help much. You really need to plan your moves and figure out what can't be moved where, as well as what can. There's no time limit, so you can decipher the layout for as long as it takes. You can see how many steps it takes you to complete a level too, although these aren't saved anywhere, so I don't know if there's much purpose to it. Yes, there are a lot of levels, but this game marked one of the first instances with a password save system on the Game Boy. There's also a rudimentary level editor, but you won't use it. Graphically, there's very little to look at, and what's there is confused. Like some crazy MC Escher lithograph, when moving horizontally, your character is side on, but vertically, you get an overhead. How hard would it have been to choose one or the other? If inconsistent there, unfortunately the levels are too consistent. There's absolutely no variation in the tile design at all. This is a basic game, there are no frills. It doesn't look great, and audibly it wears very thin very quickly. Unless you manage to get to the end, there's one song all the way through, and you will hate it after about a minute and a half. There is a very early toe-in-the-water attempt at a synthesized voice. When you beat a level, the guy exclaims, "Yeah!" while doing the night fever thing. You'll see what I mean. It's pure cheese, but for what the game is trying to be, I don't think this matters too much. Such a simple game concept is put to great use over the course of more than 100 levels, with an excellently measured difficulty curve. The game gets really hard towards the end, leaving you confused not only at how to beat the stage, but how they were even designed in the first place. If you like to punish yourself with devilishly sadistic puzzles, this is great. Just turn the sound off. A game with a strange history is Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle. Kemco originally wanted to create a Famicom game based on the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The problem arose when wanting to export it to the NES. There was already an LJN game based on this film, so Kemco bought the rights to use some of the Looney Tunes characters instead. By the time the Game Boy title was due to be released, the rights for Roger Rabbit had expired, leaving Kemco scratching around for a gimmick for their game. The opportunity to use Mickey Mouse proved too lucrative to turn down. So, in Japan, the game Mickey Mouse was released in 1989. This was based on the original Famicom NES titles, so to avoid confusion, Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle was given a North American and European release on the Game Boy in 1990. 3 different main characters, but ultimately the same game. Whatever you know it by, the game involves Bugs Bunny, or Mickey, wandering around various floors collecting carrots, or keys, while trying to avoid the Rascals, which include Wile E. Coyote, Sylvester, and Daffy Duck. I seem to recall Elmer Fudd being Bugs Bunny's nemesis, but he doesn't appear. What do I know? Anyway, once you collect all the carrots, you move to the next floor. There are a lot of floors in this castle, and the variation isn't the greatest, but thankfully there's a password given to you after each stage, so you don't have to slog through the whole thing. The manual proudly points out that Bugs is an agile character. He can even survive jumps from high places. He's a bunny who can't jump. You get trapped in a corner, you're wabbit stew. The pace of the game is thankfully decent. Movement is fluid and responsive, and Bugs moves at a reasonable speed. You can fly through the levels, and each time you beat one, you get an extra life. Even if it is terribly repetitive, Crazy Castle is a surprisingly polished game for so early on. It wasn't quite a launch title, but any game released in the 80s that plays quite as nice as this can be praised. I don't think that justifies the 300 sequels it got though. The first of many racing games was Motocross Maniacs. a time trial motorbike stunt game in the vein of Excitebike. Where that title had multiple races, this one is just a single competitor, although you can race a ghost bike of the time to beat. Where Excitebike was three-dimensional, the Game Boy version is on a single plane. Here, your aim is to take on each course over 2 laps before the timer runs out. Scattered across the route are various pickups that extend your time, tyre wear, and nitro boosts. The nitro is vital to getting through large parts of the tracks. There are loops and ramps aplenty, and your success or failure is determined by both your landing angle and how well you preserve the amount of nitro you have. If you run out, you may as well give up because you're not getting back in time, and there are some jumps that you simply can't pass without the nitro. The problem therein being that there's no automatic restart, you have to wait for that timer to drop, so go for those pickups. You can also collect top speed boosts, but you lose these if you come off your bike. Hopefully, if you're a Game Boy fanatic, you can excuse poor graphics. Motocross Maniacs isn't a pretty game. The whole visage is a bland, unappealing hodgepodge of platforms, floating in the ether of what looks like the loading program of the Matrix, white as far as you can see. When going up an incline, your bike floats a foot from the track, which seems like it would have been a perfectly easy fix that testing should have brought up. The music is pretty cool though, it serves as a good backdrop for a racing game, and the engine and boost sounds use the sound chip very effectively, so kudos there. Getting to grips with how the bike controls takes a while to get used to, but it's quite fun if you give it time. My word though, those time limits get really cruel after a while, to the point where you cannot afford to fall or miss a single time boost. There's a strange trick if you have a lot of nitro where you rapidly press the B button and you're propelled rocket-like in whatever direction your bike is facing. It's very useful if you're running out of time towards the end. Either the gravity is a little strange or the air is really thick, because you slow down mid-jump in a way that doesn't feel Newtonian. It's a fun game, despite looking half-finished and half-tested. You probably won't beat this, but if you do, then believe me, you've truly earned that ending. Which is a shame, because there isn't one. The trap-em-up genre was a pretty big thing in the 8-bit computer days of the late 70s and early 80s, with games like Heiankyo Alien and Lode Runner shifting plenty of copies on the Apple IIs and VIC-20s of the day. The latter saw the light in 1983. Lode Runner was created by Doug Smith for the Apple II. In this Game Boy exclusive sequel, you play as a chap who has found himself in these labyrinths of doom, TM, with the intention of plundering gold, or piles of dirt as they appear, from these skeleton robot monsters. I'm just going from the cover art here, the sprites look nothing like that. Sadly, he didn't come prepared. Your only means of offense against these creatures is to dig a hole and hope the hapless things toddle into it like lemmings. You can then walk on their heads to avoid them or bury them. The whole point is to collect all the piles of dirt on a stage without getting caught. Quite often you'll have to dig holes in order to get to the dirt below, however you can only dig diagonally down to either side, not next to or immediately below you, and your character can't jump or even climb out of a hole, so quite often you'll get stuck. Your only option then is to restart the level with select, or wait for the hole to fill in and die. The digging mechanism is so limited that these puzzles really aren't even satisfying to work out, and the onslaught of enemies walking towards you just makes for a frustrating experience. The sprites are small and cramped, but even so, the level scrolls far too much. So much so that the endlessly respawning enemies can drop out of nowhere and land right near you, leaving no time for maneuver. It's so slow too, everything moves at the most tedious, plodding pace. The whole thing is just way too hard. I don't always mind high difficulty. Let's face it, this was the 1980s, but there's nothing driving you to care about succeeding in Hyper Lode Runner. Apparently there are 50 levels, but when it's hard enough to complete the first one, why would you bother? This is an ugly game, both visually and conceptually. The soundtrack is non-existent, or it may as well be. But even if it looked and sounded great, I'm still not sure I'd care. All in all, Hyper Lode Runner stands testament to the fact that while some types of games are timeless, some genres have a lifespan. The whole trap 'em up craze was starting to look pretty stale by 1989. A strong contender for the illustrious title of cutest handheld alligator-based pinball game of all time is Kirby's Pinball Land creators' first attempt at the genre. Revenge of the Gator is a Game Boy exclusive title that really stood the test of time. Even so early in the Game Boy's lifespan, it wasn't really bested in the genre. The physics are absolutely perfect. You'd have a hard time improving on them. The speed and gravity feel right, and the ball travels in the angles that you feel it should. It's pinball, you already know how to play it. However, the digital medium allows for certain things that would be very tricky to build into an actual table. The greatest video game pinball titles didn't simply offer a simulation, rather enhancing the experience with bonus levels, enemies, breakable blocks, and so on. And you certainly get all of that here. The single course on offer is a 4-screen affair whereby if you lose your ball, you simply go to the next screen. And of course there are methods to progress higher up the table by opening gates or finding entrances to one of the 3 bonus stages. The reason this works well is down to the fact that HAL didn't attempt to code some fancy scrolling between screens, but a simple transition that really suits the Game Boy's capability. It's a forgiving pinball game. Games can go on for a long time, and despite the fact that the only objective is to get as high a score as possible, you don't lose interest. And if you do end up losing a ball, this cute little cartoon alligator catches it in his mouth. Who could be mad at that? The music is a total earworm. A small collection of catchy, upbeat little tunes that don't stale out on you, and the accompanying effects complement it nicely without overriding anything. Sadly, there's no way to save your high scores. Most early games didn't have batteries, but this would have been nice. There's a very cool multiplayer feature via the link cable where 2 people can play a kind of air hockey game, a 2-sided table where the objective is to score goals on your opponent, making this one of the first legitimate reasons to buy a link cable. Could this be not only the cutest, but the best pinball game on the Game Boy? It's a tough call to make. Pinball Dreams, Fantasies, and the later HAL offerings might have something to say about that, but they came much later. For 1989, this is very impressive. Ambitious is an understatement when Konami followed in Mario's footsteps in bringing a classic NES franchise to the Game Boy. So dark and cinematic was the atmosphere of the Unholy Trilogy, at a time when video games were still pretty cartoonish. To match that on a handheld would have been a massive achievement. You play as Christopher Belmont, forefather to Simon, as he tries to vanquish Dracula for the final time, again. Canonically, this game takes place 100 years after the events of Dracula's Curse, and 120 before Simon's first 2 outings. The storyboard is not a long one. There are only 4 stages, however the levels are long and drawn out, which is only reinforced by the lethargy at which Christopher Belmont walks. Think the original Castlevania game at around 70% speed. Maybe this creative decision was made in order to compensate for the dot matrix blur. Also, there is a noticeable input lag where pressing A does not instantaneously make Christopher jump, but a split second later. It's not a huge thing, but means your reflexes need to be that much sharper. Whipping things mid-jump takes a fair bit of getting down. The levels follow the usual theme, starting off in the forest approaching Dracula's castle, working your way deeper within until the usual final showdown. Along the way, some of the most exquisitely detailed backgrounds are on show, from the woodlands and graveyards to castle halls and armories. As you would expect from an 8-bit Castlevania game, there are some awkward, almost pixel-perfect jumps to make, but thankfully they held back on the pain. As long as you keep moving, it's usually obvious what you need to do. There are no stairs, which could be construed as a good thing, considering this franchise's early history with annoying stairs. Rather, to move up and down, often you need to climb or descend ropes, like some torturous gym class. While on the rope, you can't whip anything though, which can lead you to occasionally take cheap damage. The levels follow the normal jump and whip routine, except for stage 3. Here, there are fewer enemies. Instead, the player must traverse a series of moving spike wall platforming sections. This part really highlights the drawn-out nature of the game. The jumps between rope sections are pretty precise, and for the most part, touching any part of the encroaching spikes is an instant death. This goes on for a good 5 minutes, with no room for error. You can't rush the auto-scrolling either. Jump too soon and you'll die just as if you jump too late. It's sadistic, but also strangely tense and exciting. The music, as you would expect, is a real highlight in Castlevania the Adventure. The series, with barely an exception, has stunned audiences with every new iteration on any platform, with its anthemic melodies lying somewhere between power metal and rock opera, with just the right amount of gothic. Each of the 4 stages has its own theme, and while the motifs aren't taken from any other Castlevania game previous to this, they can undeniably belong only to one franchise. You can power up your whip twice by collecting orbs. The first extends the range and damage of your whip, and the second fires a projectile, which is invaluable when collecting otherwise inaccessible extra lives. Get hit though, and you lose a level. Twice, and you're back to the basic whip. This makes the bosses damn hard because dodging is so difficult. Your movement speed and slightly too large hitbox means you'll probably want the extra range and stay further away for the most part. The sub-weapons are sadly omitted, leaving collectible hearts to actually mean health for a change, but you can pick up strategically placed invincibility, which helps you pass some of the more annoying sections safely. There isn't a great deal of enemy variation. You probably see only around 10 different antagonists, none of whom are particularly tricky to kill. It wouldn't be a Castlevania game without the dreaded bats, of course, and their movement patterns are the only slightly unpredictable ones. Otherwise, enemies are quite manipulatable, like the birds. If you jump just as they start to dive bomb you, they'll fly straight over your head and off the screen. Gone are the Medusa heads and skeletons, and apart from Dracula, you don't fight any traditional bosses. A notable omission is death. It feels like something is missing without the Reaper featuring somewhere. Ambitious, yes, but Konami was restrained enough that Castlevania the Adventure works for the most part. They were unlikely to get everything right the first time round. The original NES title was by no means perfect either, but we were given an early treat with this one. Get past the flaws, and what you're retrospectively left with is a framework, a promise of what they could do. Sit tight and remember, 1991 was not far away. If golf is the best way to ruin a good walk, then volleyball must be the best way to ruin a good drinking binge on the beach. Okay, so maybe that's the English guy and me talking, but I've been to Malibu Beach, and believe me, the Mai Tais were in abundance. If you can't afford a holiday in SoCal, though, maybe Malibu Beach Volleyball will give you a taste of what it's like there. I'm being facetious, of course. This game doesn't even describe a cold winter's morning walking the dog along Skegness seafront. You can play as men or women, something quite ahead of its time for a sports game, until you realise that beach volleyball isn't really anything other than an excuse to look at beautiful people jumping around in their underwear. If that's what you're after in a video game, well, you won't get that either, so maybe seek out a copy of one of the Dead or Alive spin-offs. For the game itself, you press A to spike, B to jump. You can only score points on your serve, and if you lose a rally, service switches to the other team. You can choose between 4 teams, but there are no variations in the AI strength. There's insanely good and nothing else. I've rarely scored a single point in this game. I can win my serve back occasionally, but the AI so rarely miss that it's academic. You can't switch between your 2 players. Instead, they both move at the same time like synchronized swimmers, so tactics go out of the window. I would imagine, in volleyball, it helps to place one person close to the net and have one further back, but that's not an option here. Like a lot of early sports games, there's no tournament mode or campaign. There is a 2-player mode, which is probably better, but good luck finding someone willing to play this with you. Continuing the strong start of Game Boy puzzle games in the early years, Kwirk sees you play as the eponymous tomato, bear with me, who lost his girlfriend Tammy in a series of mazes. Aside from the fact that you're a fruit, the story is the same as a million others, where women, even ones made of food, are a liability, needing to be rescued by a masculine hero. It's such a common story that even by 1989 people must have been fed up with it. You're almost better off not bothering to paperclip such a tired old tale onto a game like this. It doesn't endear the characters to the player any more than if you had to traverse these labyrinths in order to find a bottle of salad dressing. Anyway, the game itself is quite inventive. Kwirk must push blocks out of the way or down holes to make a bridge, while spinning these rotating walls, with the intention each time of getting to the stairway. Occasionally, one or more of his friends turn up. There's a carrot and what looks like an aubergine, who don't have any unique skills but allow you to perform moves that would otherwise not be possible with only one character. As you would expect with a game in this genre, the puzzles are very clever. You'll need to plot your moves carefully, as one false one can get you stuck, meaning a restart. The levels are small in design, but it's no problem to see what's going on. The music is catchy, but the movement sounds can be a little grating after a while. There are a few different game modes. Going up is your normal fare, progressing up the tower by getting to the stairwell each time. Heading out is slightly different, more of a level rush where you select a number of levels and then beat them as quickly as possible. There's also a versus mode, which is 2 players racing the heading out via a link cable. There are plenty of levels with 3 difficulties to choose from. The puzzles are ingenious at times, agonizing at others, but always satisfying to beat when you've spent 10 minutes working one out. Kwirk is a rare case of an Atlus game that was well distributed, being published by Acclaim and Nintendo in various locations. There are a couple of sequels to Kwirk that were released after Atlus had abandoned these big company associations, and as such are amongst the rarest games on the system. If puzzle games are your thing, you can be grateful that this one is comparatively easy to find, and it's certainly worth it. The third of the generically titled sports games released in the inaugural year could well be the one that holds up best today. Golf, like tennis, spawned a series of Mario-themed releases starting on the Game Boy Color. Not just a port of the NES version, Golf has two types of course to choose from: Japan and USA modes. USA mode is considerably harder, with more hazards and fewer areas of easy going. What's striking about this game is the randomly generated nature of the courses. The hazard placement is different each time, which is quite remarkable and offers a great replayability factor. Each shot needs careful consideration, and if you achieve birdies or better, you're rewarded with pleasing animations of Mario celebrating. In fact, the animations throughout are a really nice feature. There is a very enjoyable two-player mode, and also this game marked the first time that a save battery was included in a game pack, meaning you can save your best scores and put the game down after a hole and pick it up later. The music is nothing to remark upon, but in-game it is rescinded anyway, an excellent design choice as you really want to replicate that quiet contemplation you'd get on a real course. Some chirpy chiptunes clearly wouldn't fit in. The sound effects that fill the silence, though, really add to the atmosphere. The sound you get when you finally sink that ball is very satisfying. Everything is clear when you look at the bird's eye view of the hole, and the variety of clubs and their respective power bars have a marked effect on the quality of your strokes. It's a real thinking game, which is easy to pick up, but real finesse needs to be worked at. The wind needs to be taken into consideration too, and muscle memory can't be relied upon with the power of your shots, as it's different depending on which club you choose, the terrain, distance, and so on. Overall, it's a very well programmed little gem, which you need to put the time into studying. It's very rewarding if you do. There's a reasonable chance I'm not going to review every pachinko game out there, as, boy howdy, they're all much of a muchness. I'll decide when I get to each of them whether there's any merit in discussing their finer points, or whether I simply refer to them in the Other Japanese Exclusives section at the end of the book. You won't be surprised to learn that they're all JP exclusives, because there's a good chance you don't even know what pachinko is. For the unfamiliar, pachinko is a Japanese physical arcade game somewhere between a slot machine and a pinball table without the flippers. Each board features a spiral layout with holes, bumpers and slots, and you fire balls into it with various strengths, letting gravity do the work. You'll get something like, say, 100 balls to start with, and more can be earned in various ways. I'd surmise it's more luck-based than pinball, but I might get roasted for saying so. Like I say, there were a lot of pachinko games on the Game Boy, and as far as I can remember at this point, they were all Japanese-only cartridges. I'm picking this one out because it's the earliest, and it gives me a good chance to write a bit about the subject. There is some semblance of a story here. You play as what looks like a ball bearing with arms and legs. You start on the northwest square of a map screen with several buildings. These represent various pachinko parlours, of which there are 8 in total. You'll need to try to make it to the goal at the southeast. Various bridges between parlours are broken initially and can only be repaired by scoring enough points on tables that you have access to already. Each parlour has 12 pachinko machines, for some reason labelled 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 15. I have no idea where the missing numbers are, but there it is. You'll need to beat 3 per parlour to leave, but more will have to be completed in order to fix all the bridges. On each machine there are 2 numbers. The left tells you how many balls there are left, and the right shows a number, around 2000 at the start, that you need to try to reduce to 0. You hold left or right to alter the power of your ball launcher, with the aim of getting the balls into the slots. If you can get the balls into the large slot in the middle, the number will decrease even faster. The game has very little to offer in the way of skill. With no visual indicator of your power bar, you don't really know how much strength you're applying, and of course, the gravity acts on the balls in a random way anyway. Randomness is simulated pretty well as it happens. Hold A and speed up time by 100 times on an emulator, and watch how little of a pattern these shots do actually follow. You'd think that given enough results over time, things would tend to some sort of average, but they don't. I'll have to ask my physicist friends what that means. Anyhow, I'll maybe have a more in-depth look at a couple more Pachinko titles as we go along, but I can't promise they'll be any more interesting than Pachinko Time. The marketing wizards at Square had a major lightbulb moment when it came to translating Makai Tushi Saga into English. Tack the Final Fantasy name on the front. It wasn't a great stretch to pass it off, granted, there are plenty of similarities between this and the first couple of Final Fantasy NES titles. However, it proved to be a great move, as the first title in a super strong list of Game Boy RPGs would also become the first in the unbelievable list of million sellers for Square. The adventure follows 4 customizable characters who attempt to reach paradise via a tower at the center of the world. There are 4 worlds to traverse in total, each with a sub-quest to obtain magical spheres in some way which allow passage to the next world. The game is replayable depending on the character choices, and although there is no immediately obvious leveling up system, each character has a unique stat improvement arc to take. There are 3 classes, the first and most obvious choice being humans, male or female. The gender makes little difference. Humans' stats don't improve after battles, you need to buy potions to raise them. You can buy HP boosts, an attack, defense, and agility increases. The amount these potions work is strangely random. Sometimes you get 20 HP, sometimes 1. So the less honest of you can save exploit. Of course, stats can be improved by equipping new weapons and armor. Humans are the most versatile in this area, they can equip most weapons in the game. Also, all characters have 8 slots into which all armor, weapons, skills, and spells need to be allocated. And humans are the only characters to have all 8 slots open. Mutants, on the other hand, have 4 slots pre-allocated for mutant skills. These are seemingly random skills that improve or decrease depending on how you use the characters. 4 slots can still be used to wear armor or equip spells and weapons. The skills are where the power of this class lies. There are skills that lower the stats of enemies, raise a defensive barrier across your team, or, particularly useful, an ESP skill that can prevent the damage from the next attack occurring. These are random, though, and seem to appear and disappear on an RNG whim. Similarly, the stats increase after battles, but somewhat randomly. It could be that the stat changes are down to the activity of the characters in battle. Use a magic spell and your mana increases. Take damage and your defense increases, and so on. It's certainly an interesting mechanic, and mutants form a key part of your squad. The third class is probably the most curious of the 3. Monsters may seem weak at first, and certainly they're the hardest characters to use. However, upon defeating enemies, occasionally meat can drop. For instance, the game will produce meat of skeleton, I'm serious, and ask you whether you want to eat it. For humans and mutants, nothing happens, but monsters can morph into various forms depending on the type of meat. Consuming the flesh of bosses makes you particularly strong, so it's worth sticking with these characters until you get further in. It's a very cool addition to the game. The overall look of the game, especially in the overworld, is very simplistic and generic. Everything is square, no pun intended, and angular. There's very little texture to look at. The enemies look sinister, and there's some enjoyable battle animation, but when you're walking around, expect to see the same handful of tiles. The music is by one Nobuo Uematsu, and while it doesn't represent his best work, it's still a wonderful accompaniment to an early 8-bit adventure. The dialogue is noticeably stunted throughout because, as commonplace with earlier games, the space allowed for text boxes was not changed. This meant translators had to fit the English into the same amount of character space as the original Japanese, which doesn't work. It's possible to say much more with a Japanese character than the equivalent number of English letters, so very often the story is shoehorned into place. It's a shame because, as games like Link's Awakening and Pokémon proved, captivating and expressive stories can be morphed from the original tongue. Use your imagination though, and you can get past this. Final Fantasy was not the only series to suffer from this in the early years. The story has its fair share of RPG cliches, but will grab your attention, and it's certainly not dragged out. There's not much walking around, so the tale progresses nicely. Is this the greatest RPG on the system? Of course not. It's probably not even in the top 3. It's an enthralling tale though, and despite its rudimentary visage, is wholly playable and enjoyable, with just enough uniqueness to make it treasurable for any JRPG fan. Shogi is loosely referred to as Japanese chess, which it kind of is, although there are a fair few differences. Some of the pieces are the same, there are pawns and knights, but some are different. The concept is the same, you have to capture the other side's king in a checkmate. And it's considered just as serious a game as the one we know as chess, with tradition and legacy hundreds of years old. Instead of pieces that roughly look like people, or horses, castle towers, or whatever, in Shogi it's traditional to have two-sided pentagons pointing in the direction of movement that have a kanji inscription of the real character name. And here's where the first hurdle lies in learning the game, especially for a non-Japanese reader. If a player manages to get a piece to the opposite side of the board, you can promote it. Rather than exchanging, say, a pawn for a bishop, you flip the piece over, upon which is a new inscription detailing the piece's new rank. This opens up new movement patterns specific to each new promoted piece, offering another level of strategy. The strategy itself is way too complex for me to detail here, especially because most of it is lost on me, but if it's something that intrigues you, then there are endless tutorials to teach you the intricacies. Shogi on Game Boy probably isn't that, but once you know the rules, it serves as good as anything to play the game. You can play a 1 or 2 player game, or there are also 60 unique puzzles whereby you join a game mid-session in varying degrees of jeopardy and need to figure out how to beat the AI. A pretty neat touch that elongates the appeal for more experienced players. Graphically, you have to say it does its job, however the kanji is pretty tough to read at times being so small. If you wanted the whole game on screen at the same time, there's not a lot of wiggle room with a 9x9 board. The pieces don't have that beveled point to show which side they're on, which only adds to the difficulty. The sound effects are pretty rough, except some very early voice synthesis. I think it's saying onegaishimasu, which is a way of saying please or thank you in normal conversation, but as I've now learned can also be used at the start of a game or sporting contest to mean have a good game, reminding us just how valued politeness is in Japanese culture. Similar to Pachinko, this is the first of at least 7 different Game Boy games dedicated to Shogi, and I imagine I won't be reviewing them all. I'd love to play this game in real life against someone who could explain it to me as we go along. A versus CPU experience doesn't help much. Something I really want to find out in the process of writing this book is whether or not there are any good fighting games on the Game Boy. There are plenty of them out there, but so often the 2-button format, coupled with the small monochrome screen, meant that even massive franchises such as Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter struggle to take anyone by storm, leaving expectant fans feeling lackluster and longing for a Mega Drive. Necessitating 2 copies of a game to play multiplayer really kills the strongest feature of games in this genre. Acknowledging these difficulties exist before you even turn the game on, it's only fair to look at what each fighting game does offer. Fist of the North Star is a Japanese manga that ran between 1983 and 1988, with a couple of movies thrown into the mix. It's set in a post-apocalyptic world, run by bands of mohawked outlaws, and is gratuitously and gloriously violent. The main protagonist is Kenshiro, a martial arts master who wanders from town to town looking for his kidnapped fiancée, while protecting the weak and helpless by making people's heads explode in ever more gory and savage fashion. Sounds like a promising premise for a fighting game, right? Sadly, this was a few years before Mortal Kombat would shock parents and delight teenagers with its inventive brutality. The developers did their best with the controls. Punches, kicks, and movement work how you'd expect them to. There's also a charge attack that's unique to each character. 11 fighters are available to choose from, and they all have a specific moveset. Once you've chosen your fighter, you proceed along your way through 10 big brawls for the King of Universe. You fight all the other combatants in a predetermined order, earning experience points and attack-defense boosts upon victory. It's a one-kill game over here though. Each fight is only one round, and if you lose, that's it. One of the biggest letdowns with Fist of the North Star is the lack of detail in the sprites. They're so small. Unless you pick the fat one, a lot of them are indistinguishable from one another. This leaves a lot of wasted space. The backgrounds are okay, but largely unvaried. The fighters can jump nearly 3 times their own height, but they still don't reach the top of the screen. On the character select screen, you don't even get a close-up of your fighter, which is an inexcusable lack of effort. The driving, heart-pumping music you'd expect is there in parts, not in others, and it's always shrill. It's as if the bass channel was forgotten completely. The sound effect, note the use of the singular there, is shallow and thin, with no real sense of heavy contact when your blows land. There may be a decent fighting game on the Game Boy, but Fist of the North Star isn't it. They should have put at least one head explosion in there. Have you ever heard of Qbillion? No, me neither. Have you ever heard of Sita Corporation either? You can be excused for that, there's a good reason. They apparently had a hand in Project Sylpheed on the Xbox 360, and Exhaust Heat on the SNES was really pretty good. But other than that, there's probably nothing you've played, unless you like Mahjong. If Boxxle and Kwirk are examples of how to make good brain teasers on the Game Boy, Qbillion is an example of how to frustrate your audience in a very different way. On each level, there are a series of numbered blocks. The number represents the height of that block tower. The gameplay, like the overall presentation, is a bit lacking in depth. You need to push all the blocks on the screen to level 1, but you can only move them from a level 1 step lower. For instance, if there's a level 3 block, you need to be standing on a level 2 block to move it, and so on. As you progress along the stages, other little mechanics are introduced. There are shapes on some of the blocks that, when you line up 4 of the same shape, can be eliminated to clear the path for others. My biggest issue is the design choice. Maybe we can excuse the format being such an early game, but even so, what creative committee decided the block towers should be numbered? Would it have been so hard to present these puzzles in a pseudo 3D format? Having to imagine the heights of towers from a top-down perspective isn't something you should have to do. There's nothing else in the game, and they failed at it. You can't quickly work out a puzzle if you're constantly having to interpret how the pieces look. It's like trying to do a jigsaw with your eyes shut. It's so lazy, there's very little design on anything, and the music has no lasting appeal. Also, I don't know why the character is a mouse. I don't know why the mouse is moving these blocks around. And I don't know where cheese comes into the equation. Unless it's really cheap, I wouldn't bother with Qbillion. I had to buy it in my quest to own every Game Boy title, and once this review's finished, it's going on the shelf for the rest of eternity. In fact, no, if I need to clean any of my systems, I'll use this cartridge instead of a Game Boy cleaning kit. The puzzle game to choose? Are you for real? Originally called Navy Blue on its Japanese release, Battleship didn't see a release outside Japan until 1992, where it was repackaged to tie in with Mindscape's NES and Game Gear releases. This is a slimmer version of the board game. You place fewer vessels in a smaller 8x8 grid. At first, you not only have your single ship, but also other weapons depending on which ships you have remaining to you. A 2 and 3 rocket shot, as well as a 5 rocket shot in an X pattern, if you have your battleship remaining. There's also a radar that you can use to detect whether anything is hiding in a 2x2 square. You need to use these weapons early on. Quite often you can blanket a decent area that gives you vital clues as to the enemy's placements. Plus, you lose your ships, and you lose these weapons whether you used them or not. The game plays in a kind of campaign mode, in that you progress through 48 levels with a password system. Moving up the levels will increase the AI level, as well as giving you a greater variety of ships with sub-weapons, including aircraft carriers. The AI initially isn't the smartest. They'll often attack previously tried squares, or go for single squares when you've only got a 2-square ship left. However, it does increase pretty well, until you're at a stage where luck is your biggest asset. All told, this is a very cool attempt at replicating and enhancing the classic board game. The additions are enough to keep you playing the whole thing. The sound effects are spot on, using the whole scope of the sound chip to the fullest. And oh boy, that battle music is superb. It could have come from some turn-based strategy RPG like Shining Force or something. The little firing and sinking animations are solid. They look great on the little spinach screen. This really took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting to like this as much as I ended up doing. Get it, it's great. Stale as the trap 'em up genre might have felt by this point, Boomer's adventure in ASMIK World is actually pretty good. You play a cute little pink dinosaur whose aim is to climb to the top of this tower. On each floor there is a maze patrolled by a multitude of creepy crawlies and other monsters, in which somewhere there is a key hidden. More often than not, it'll be buried, so you need to find it and dig it out. Not only are the enemies out to get you, but they also want to find and withhold this key, so they'll be digging around too. Pay attention to this if you can, because if they find the key before you, they'll carry it around, and you'll have to either attack them with a collectible weapon, or dig a hole and bury them in. Once you get the key, you can unlock the door to the stairway, and the level is done. You don't have to kill any enemies, they respawn anyway, but it's worth doing for the things they might drop. Scattered around the place are compasses, which you can use to pinpoint the direction of the key. There are also metal detectors, which beep if you're close. Also available are bones, bombs, and boomerangs, which can be used offensively, and a shovel that helps you dig faster. This is really useful because Boomer seems to be digging with T-Rex arms. It takes an age to make a hole, so you need to anticipate enemy movements and leave enough time. If you see eggs, get them because they're one-ups. If you can remember where the key is, it makes the level much easier. The location doesn't ever change, which means you should only really ever lose one life per level. The music is charming and the graphics could be worse. The inclusion of the bosses serves well to split the game up and breaks up the monotony of similar levels. If there's one criticism, it would be that the game is too hard. The number of enemies gets pretty overwhelming, and the speed at which Boomer does anything means you need to be totally prescient. It's not Hyper Lode Runner, though, which can only be a good thing. Here is a legend of one chosen by destiny, who must destroy a looming darkness, returning the light of a kingdom. There was a brave king who ruled the peaceful country of Rikar, who one day became overwhelmed by an evil dragon. The dragon had once been bound by the hex of a sword thrust into the heart of his likeness, but the beast was able to instill strong visions of wisdom and power in the king, which brought forth the hidden evil in his heart. The dragon soon had complete control of him. The possessed king was then urged to remove the sword from the ancient painting, and when he did, darkness spilled over the land. The country declined greatly as fear in its people increased. The dragon summoned the evil power Mammon and commanded that he turn the people into trees. It was truly dark across the land, but there was a ray of light, the birth of Prince Theo. The king grew very angry at the prince, for on his left arm was a birthmark shaped like a dagger. This omen made the king rage until one day he drew his sword with intent to bring it down on the prince. A brave knight named Pascal was astonished and risked his own life to rescue Prince Theo. Pascal then fled with the prince to the forest. For fortunately, there were 3 powerful magicians who, to prevent the evil from spreading, concealed the king and his castle underground. One of the magicians had retrieved the Sword of Hope, which had been pulled from the painting then. 3 magicians secured themselves behind locked gates. Time has passed. The tide is turning. Now a truly important mission awaits you. Evil has overcome the once peaceful kingdom of Rikar. A mighty dragon has corrupted the mind of King Hennessy, encouraging him to withdraw the Sword of Hope from its painting prison, thus releasing the dragon to summon the dark powers of Mammon, covering the land in darkness and turning its inhabitants into trees. Who better to wrest the world from the brink of peril than young Prince Theo, a 15-year-old untrained whelp, who also happens to be the Twisted Regent's son? Well, probably lots of people, but Theo is who we're going with. There's a prophecy that needs fulfilling, you see, so it's got to be Theo. As you can guess, what we have here is an almost paint-by-numbers tropey RPG. It's linear to a fault. You fight a boss who gives you a key that opens the next section. You collect the things to get the other thing to kill the bad thing at the end. Not that this is a problem directly, plenty of great RPGs have a similar storyboard. However, in the Sword of Hope, there isn't a great deal of exploration. The maps are pretty small, with the game artificially stretched out, with a constant, unavoidable stream of enemies to face. If an enemy is in your way when you try to move screens, you'll have to fight it. Defeat it, and you don't move screens, you stay where you are, meaning you can sometimes fight 3 or 4 rounds of enemies before being able to move. In a game without maps, this can leave you lost. The attack system is basic, and although you do have a wide array of magic at your disposal, most of the spells do the same thing. Certain enemies, bosses in particular, have specific weaknesses that you need to work out, giving a reason to use them all. Accuracy is not your strong point though, nor is it your opponent's. Either side of the battle can damage themselves or their allies, which gets frustrating, but works to your advantage when one enemy inexplicably torches another one with Fireball. While the scenery looks decent, the design of some of the enemies looks a little childish and could have benefited from a little more attention to detail. There are no attack animations, sadly. The opponent's images simply move up and down. I enjoyed the soundtrack. There's enough variation to keep it fresh, and the composition is solid. There are some decidedly surreal parts. When you track down these 3 magicians, you obtain 3 eggs of power from their pigeon familiars, which you need to find the titular sword. It's pure MacGuffin. Why the power is in the eggs, and why the birds wait until you arrive to lay the eggs, once by hitting an ill-looking pigeon on the head to make it feel better, is not explained. Probably because there's no explanation to give that would stop this being a completely mad plot device. There are some Simon's Quest level cryptic parts that make just as little sense. Casting a spell in front of an altar to receive a charm, which you then wave at a seemingly ordinary looking pipe organ to turn it into a ruby. There's no real intellection in doing this, except that it tells you to in the walkthrough that you will have to use. Something that falls into the so bad it's good category, especially with some of these early Japanese to English imports, are the great blind idiot translations made famous by games such as Zero Wing and Metal Gear. The Sword of Hope has little in the I feel asleep league, but there are some gems nonetheless. Searching your surroundings for loot early on grants the narrative, you watch path, there's herb, and attempting to buy something in the shop that you can't afford gets you admonished with, Mister, you have not paid me enough for the gold. In a time before the internet brought people of all tongues closer together, you can excuse the translators. It adds to the charm of the game, and it's not as if you don't know what they mean. A personal favourite is the game's equivalent of a critical hit. You attack a vital part of the enemy. Delightful. It's not wholly fair to judge this game too retrospectively. Yes, the RPG clichés were already established by 1989, but they were by no means hammered into the ground, and The Sword of Hope doesn't abuse the formula really. The graphic adventure layout is a pleasing choice which looks really good. It's a sweet little adventure with plenty of charm. Just don't expect anything you've not seen before. You know that dream you have where you're running and running, but for the life of you, you're not getting anywhere? That's this game. Never before have I seen a game where your character moves so slowly. It's like plate tectonics level of slow, or like trying to get 50 pensioners aboard a coach trip kind of slow. You're this kung fu person who's trying to get to the end of this straight path to beat up the emperor guy, I think. But is for some reason still wearing his dojo robes. Not exactly inconspicuous, you pretty much only wear those if you intend to fight someone. Ninja-like discretion is not the aim here. Once you and your opponent crawl towards each other in what can only be described as the world's worst stop-motion film, you can punch or kick in 3 directions. But whether or not any hits register is governed by some quote-unquote coding that I've yet to figure out. Eventually, you'll kick the guy in the thigh enough, nothing else works as far as I can tell, that after a comedic 2-second delay, he crumples to a heap. Keep going along and you fight a boss, which then lets you get a bit faster or stronger. Do this twice more, fight various odd-looking bosses that seem to include Santa's Little Helper, kick an eagle in the face, and that's the whole game. You rescue the girl. Good grief. The jumbled mess of notes that constitute the music sounds like what happens when you leave Pro Tracker open on your Amiga 1200 and your little sister comes in and starts mashing the keyboard. It's an obscure reference, I know, but it really does sound like that. I don't see why Darth Vader has a karate robe on. I'm not sure why that pharaoh points at you. I'm beyond confused as to why these enemies form an orderly queue so you can kick them in the thighs one at a time. To be honest, I'm at a loss as to why this game is a thing at all. This is one of the most horrendous messes you could ever find. Fortunately, it only came out in Japan, so you probably won't ever accidentally buy it.